Welcome to Fire Engineering's Training Minutes. I'm Mark Gregory, along with Pat Nichols. Today we're going to discuss impalements. Here we have a construction site. We have a worker who is impaled on a section of rebar. Things you want to think about, your scene safety. Coming into the scene, we want to make sure it's safe for us as the rescuers. Lockout, tagout. Is there anything that we could shut down or de-energize? Again, creating any further problems. What we're particularly going to discuss today is the actual disentanglement of the victim, removing this victim from this section of rebar. One tool of choice that we have today that we'd like to use, is the bandsaw. The beauty with the bandsaw is that it's got minimum vibration with the blade and minimal heat that it gives off. So we're going to be able to cut as close as we can to this victim without causing any further injuries, particularly internal injuries. If you attempted to use a reciprocating saw, a rescue cutter, or something of the like, the problem that you run into is every time that you cut over here, you perform any sort of action, it's going to vibrate inside the victim, causing further internal injuries. So Pat, we're going to specifically concentrate, like I said, on doing the disentanglement portion. As far as the Ems Roll here, we would have a backboard, collar on our victim, and providing stabilization. It's going to be key for Pat to let me know how far he's getting it with his cut. The reason I need to know, the load is going to be transferred from the section of rebar that's impaled into the victim to me. Pat, whatever you said. All right, as you can see, minimal amount of noise. That's good for the psychological aspect of the patient, okay? We've got the patient now supported. We've got the backboard behind the patient, all right? Bring the patient down to the side. He's going to be in the lateral recumbent position. Something that we have to consider, depending on how far the rebar is actually sticking out of the back of the victim, is with our backboard. We may need to modify a backboard, drill a hole through it, something that we can get the patient then firmly put onto the backboard. Pat's also got the tape measure. While we're performing the rescue, several things that we have to think about is transportation. Getting the victim into the back of the ambulance. If we're going to be transporting them in the lateral recumbent position, are we going to be able to transport them on a stretcher? If not, something that we have to consider is removing the stretcher out of the back of the ambulance, removing the hardware that holds the stretcher, and sliding the victim right onto the floor of the ambulance itself. The other thing is the opening. Depending on if we had a larger section of rebar here, the victim may not be able to be transported into the ambulance with a larger section of rebar. That's going to dictate how far of a cut we're going to be able to make. Another thing that we have to think about is our egress from the worksite area. Transporting the victim in the position, are we going to have to go through fences or tight areas that they could be hindered by the section of rebar? In this evolution, what we're going to attempt to do now is we're going to use the torch to disentangle the victim from this section of rebar. With the torch, we know that we're going to have heat. We have to think about the heat dissipation through the rebar, causing further injuries to the victim himself. So in order to dissipate the heat, what we've done here is we've put some gauze wrapped around this rebar. We're also using an IV line, and all we're basically going to do is soak the gauze to help dissipate the heat. If we don't have an IV, we've got a 2.5 gallon can on the fire truck that we can use, and that'll help. Once this has been soaked down, again, we're going to provide victim stabilization, and Pat's going to end up using a oxyacetylene torch. He's going to make a cut here, all right? As much section as possible that we can cut, we'd like to get. That way it makes it a lot easier for transporting the victim to the hospital. Pat, it's all yours. All right, we've got on our PPE. Pat's got the goggles. We've got a burn blanket in place, again, protecting the victim, the rest of their body. Now I'm just going to show you here. You can see the difference here. There's absolutely no heat right now. All right, we're dissipating the heat very well with the gauze and the IV solution. All right, victim has been stabilized. All right, you can see how hot it is at the tip there, but notice, we can touch here with no problem whatsoever. There's been no heat transferred to the victim. We're gonna lay the victim down again in the lateral recumbent position and transport them to the nearest trauma center. Thanks for watching Fire Engineering's Training Minutes. I'm Mark Gregory, and this is Pat Nichols.